guys, and welcome back to my channel. How are ya? Today we will continue with this book, Paintings in the Louvre. I didn't put that posted there. This is a decommissioned library book, but I thought it fit for YouTube. I think this is a painting by the French artist Ing. But today, we'll continue where we left off. 1250 to 1500. Way back. Now, I want to say up front, I'm going to pronounce a lot of things wrong. Anything that isn't French or English, and even some things that are, I can't vouch for my ability to pronounce them. And I think there is probably going to be some Italian and Latin in this section, and I'm just sorry ahead of time. But I don't really know how to pronounce this. Is Italian the hard C? Ceni di Beppo. Called Cimabue or Chemo, I don't know. Anyway, the unique potentialities of Western painting, which are among the great discoveries of mankind, emerged in Tuscany in the last years of the 13th century. I also want to say, and I mentioned this in the other video, that these books are pretty old and reflect a mindset in art history that I assume has changed since, and especially during the last couple of years, which have involved like an attempt to be less Western-centric in our interpretation of art. That being said, let's continue. This development is as well displayed in the Louvre as anywhere. The panels of the Virgin and Child enthroned, which the biographer Giorgio Vasari believed were the work of Cimabue, although we now identify one panel, still in Florence, with a later commission to Duccio, his Sienese counterpart, were the foundation of a new kind of painting, one that was always to bear the stamp of highly individual personalities. Western painting is the art of individuals. 300 years later, when Cimabue was dealt with in Vasari's Lives of the Artists, which chronicled the whole age, the memory of his personality was still vivid. Okay, so I think that this is Virgin and Child enthroned. And here we have Mary and the child. Jesus. I don't know why I feel weird saying that. And then the angels. Vasari told how Cimabue would rather destroy one of his own pictures than brook any criticism of it, even his own. He had a reputation for obstinacy. Oh, I guess that means being obstinate. That earned him the nickname Oxhead. One recognizes in Cimabue's authority a quality of pride and impatience, by turns tragic, as in the now ruined crucifix of Santa Croce, and gracious as in the Louvre Virgin and Child enthroned. The Louvre picture is the largest of the series, and the one in which the sharp line of the Greek style was most fully resolved into the fluency that was to be the perennial spirit of Tuscan art. Okay, so I guess Cimabue went by Ceni di Beppo, and this is from the 1200s. It's kind of wild to think about something that old, and probably even wilder to see it in person. Okay, so this is from the School of Latium, or the School of Latium, I don't know. But this is St. Francis of Assisi here. With a crucifixion wound. pictures from the School of Bologna. Triptych with the crucifixion surrounded by the Virgin of Mercy, the Annunciation, Coronation of the Virgin, and 6 saints. And then over here, Master of San Francesco, painted cross. Entered the Louvre in 1981. And here we have Simone de Crocifici, I think. Virgin and Child with Saints. It's quite an elaborate piece. Made from wood. Deposition from the Cross from the 1330 by Pietro da Rimini, active in the first half of the 14th century. Okay, Giotto di Bondone. Pictures had a special value to the Franciscan order. St. Francis of Assisi himself was not only an heir, but a living representation of Christ, an imitatio Christi. I don't know if that's right. He was in his own person a most sacred image, suffering the wounds of Christ on his own body. Full of figurative vividness, his story prompted the beginnings of painting as we know it. The Franciscan legend was unfolded in 28 large frescoes along the nave of the church at Assisi, with a reasoned solidity that was new to art. The story of how St. Francis received the stigmata. Those are the markings from crucifixion, I think. The Louvre picture, St. Francis receiving the stigmata with 3 scenes from his legend, comes from the Church of San Francesco in Pisa. The main panel is attributed to Giotto. This type of art is all about storytelling. And then down here is the Annunciation. So the Annunciation refers to the point in her pregnancy when Mary learned that she would be the mother of Christ. And I think this is meant to be the angel Gabriel who delivers the news. Okay, so the designs of the 3 small scenes, those were borrowed from Assisi and painted by the St. Francis Master's assistants. But in the main panel, the subject of St. Francis receiving the stigmata recovers a monumental concentration. The idea is that these figures have more mass and depth than earlier figures. So for instance, the drapery has a lot of detail, but the figures don't have a lot of weight and dimension. And here we can see more weight and dimension. Some more crucifixion scenes. We're seeing Francis of Assisi portraits. Simone Martini, when Clement V was elected Pope in 1305 and moved the papal seat from Rome to Avignon, painters went with him. Simone Martini, eventually the greatest painter at the new papal court in Provence, was a beacon whose influence, direct and indirect, shone widely. In The Carrying of the Cross, his design of the procession to Calvary, emptying out of the city on its fateful way, is equal to the crowded inventions of Simone's mentor, the Sienese master Duccio. With Simone, the Sienese example spread across the austere Gothic painting of the north and had a lasting effect in France. Scrambling down the precipitous road out of Jerusalem, as it is depicted in this painting, the crowd recovers with difficulty the solemnity of its procession along the road to Calvary. It is the bitter intensity of the color from the figure of Mary Magdalene onward. I'm not sure who here is meant to be Mary Magdalene. Miming, as usual, her own distraught crucifixion. Oh, perhaps this figure. That sets the ritual progress on its way. Sienese painters had a vivid sense of community, its momentum and style. Here each follower, or vicious persecutor, presses about Christ as urgently as the rest. Among the townscapes produced by Sienese painters, the view up to this rounded pink stone city is as memorable as any. St. Martin dividing his cloak, the fall of the rebel angels. It's pretty dramatic. And it's attributed to Master of the Rebel Angels. The Charity of St. Nicholas of Bari. That's funny. I actually have been to Bari before, in southern Italy. Crucifixion, the banquet of Herod, the meeting between St. James Major and Hermogenes. That's pretty intense. Is that a beheaded person? Wow. Okay. School of Paris. This endearingly ferret-like profile is the earliest pure portrait to survive in Western painting. Furthermore, John II, the Good, King of France, is the first French picture independent of manuscripts and scriptural narrative. This is from 1359 on wood. I have another carrying of the cross scene, another crucifixion scene. And this is the crucifixion with scenes from the Passion and the Resurrection. So the king, who was born in 1319, is shown at about the age of 40 with a look of premature senility. The picture may have been painted in 1356, or 1359, during his 4-year imprisonment in London after his defeat by the English at Poitiers in 1356. His court painter had joined him in captivity. Wow, he's down. Later, when the hostage who had taken his place in England escaped, John returned to England to save his honor, and he was lodged at the Palace of the Savoy, where he died in 1364. So, this, the author describes as a very different picture, which was due to the patronage of John's son, Charles V. A lantern altar frontal commissioned some 15 years later for the Cathedral of Narbonne. It was drawn in a style not unlike the accented and observant contour of the portrait. The crucifixion, adored by Charles and his queen, is framed in an architectural canopy. With the events preceding it on the left and those that followed on the right. Undivided, the scenes flow together. The recurrent violence of the Passion resolves into the meditative veneration. The dramatic logic of the story is realized with the poetic intensity that remains rare. Fra Angelico. Examples of almost the entire range of Fra Angelico's work can be seen in the Louvre. The Coronation of the Virgin, which he painted for San Domenico in Fiesole in the 1430s, has the shining clarity of color he learned from Gothic painting and the new pictorial science evolved by his contemporaries in Florence. This formal and hierarchic assembly of the saints and angels surrounding the most sacred heavenly rite has nothing in the least archaic or stilted about it. It is full of precise yet delicate attention to original observation. Even the crowding of primary colors is in no way heraldic or schematic. It is made lucid and airy by Fra Angelico's sense of light and space. Yeah, it's so clean and crisp. This is from mid-1400s, I suppose. 1430s. Wow, some interesting perspective here. The Dream of Innocent III. Almost surrealist, isn't it? St. Peter and Paul appear to St. Dominic. There's sort of a Last Supper style composition over here. Some text incorporated at the death of St. Dominic. And then the angels up here. More Fra Angelico. Crucifixion with St. Dominic. A fresco obtained from Fra Angelico's own convent of San Domenico, where his vocation and his life work began. The crucifixion was one of the first pictures to show an understanding of Masaccio's frescoes. Yeah, Masaccio's a pretty famous artist in the canon of art history, I think. It incorporated both the simple humanity and solidity of a subject conveyed with economy by the lateral fall of light across it. The Christ here, in extremis, with head sunk, closely follows the presentation of Masaccio in his altarpiece at Pisa. So having the dark sky increased the severity of the realism and reducing the light that once permeated the scene. Okay, Jan van Eyck. So I'm sure you'll see a couple here that are familiar to you. The influential Chancellor Roland of the Duke of Burgundy is not presumed to need any saintly intermediary to present him to the Virgin and Child. So, in some of these works, you'll notice that there are the usual biblical figures, but inserted are often also wealthy patrons and contemporary figures. The author says, they are old associates, and this painting is intended to distribute attention between them. That's this, I believe, this painting here. Thus, the figures on each side are equally prominent, sharing the panel. The middle position, where we expect to find the object of worship, as is the case in all the devotional paintings in this book so far, is left empty. Or rather, the space is devoted to the bare tiled floor, reflecting light and drawing our gaze out the window. The whole scene shines in the light of unbroken felicity. The town and valley beyond might be anywhere in the well-administered duchy of which the Chancellor is the real ruler. The features of several such places are combined. Is the prosperous duchy itself the real subject? Probably not. The spectator's eye and the painter's art are concentrated on the minute details. A consistent and beautiful order of visual information that portrays a certain mode of existence shared by everything we see, material and natural, human and divine. It is in this state of existence that unites the painting in a common act of worship in which we share. An amazing amount of detail in this painting, which is common in Van Eyck, but I mean the tiled floor, so elaborate, and the robes with this trim and this pattern on the Duke's coat. but also, the landscape, which is very specifically rendered. Everything is equally in focus. And as we see, the beginning of modern art history is mainly in religious iconography. Something that I always enjoy in these paintings is the rendering of animals, especially animals that would not have been familiar to the artist. They're a little funny. This is interesting, this little device to frame the painting. Presentation of the Virgin at the temple. This is Calvary. Okay, Jean Fouquet. Fouquet was the first French painter in whom a sense of the real, which we can recognize, was linked to an awareness that a similar sense had existed in the art of antiquity. He understood that the mode of representation best suited to his own time, the 15th century, might well revive a style rooted in the art of 1,000 years earlier. Fouquet was, in fact, the first Renaissance or rebirth artist outside Italy, and at least in Rome he was evidently regarded as such. In 1447, he was in Rome, recognized as the royal portraitist of France, and commissioned to paint Pope Eugenius IV and his nephews. The painting is now known only from an engraving, but it evidently inspired a genre of papal portraiture to which Raphael and Titian contributed in the century that followed. So this is Charles VII, King of France. And this is Guillaume Juvenal des Ursins, and this is a self-portrait by Fouquet in the mid-1400s. Or no, yeah, obviously I guess it's his life. His birth and death dates, I think. Some more Fouquet pieces. Some illuminated manuscript pages. It's incredible the amount of detail. No erasing. Jean A. See, the rendering is getting a lot more realistic. Duke of Bourbon and the Duchess of Bourbon. Oh, okay, so Duke of Bourbon presented by Peter. St. Peter always with the keys. Filippo Lippi. Virgin and Child surrounded by angels with Saint Frediano and Saint Augustine. It's cool. Portraits. The butterfly. The flowers. Antonio Puccio, called Pisanello. Verona before 1395. Portrait of Ginevra d'Este. Okay, Master of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Pietà, which remained for 300 years in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, is, in a sense, the most Parisian of early pictures. This is the Pietà. The background on the left shows the abbey itself, with the work of the fields proceeding in its shadow. Beyond it, on the farther bank, is the Louvre, with the hill of Montmartre behind. Oh, that's interesting. They put the Louvre in this painting. The tenderness of the style indicates a painter established in France long enough to soften the techniques that he must have learned in Cologne. The spaciousness of the design is conceived broadly enough to accommodate at once both the pitiful intensity of the subject and the natural breadth of the landscape in which it is placed. There's some paintings from Cologne. Paolo Di Dono, called Uccello. The most important Florentine picture of the mid-15th century in the Louvre is one of the three scenes from the Battle of San Romano by Uccello, which decorated Lorenzo de' Medici's bedchamber. The battle had taken place in 1432, perhaps 20 years before these works were painted. So apparently one panel is in the National Gallery of Art in London, and this panel is in the Louvre. But this panel is a little bit darker and more difficult to determine what's happening because it hasn't been cleaned in the same way as the one at the National Gallery. So it's more an example of the original, though it has less clarity of color. Look how much is in this painting, the Nativity. Pretty wild. Here we have some art from the Netherlands in the 15th century. And if I'm bad at pronouncing Italian names, I have no idea how to even approach Dutch names. I really have no idea, so apologies. This is the raising of Lazarus, and here's Jesus performing one of his miracles, which was bringing Lazarus back to life after 4 days. The picture has the stillness of Hirtgen's greatest works. There is an atmosphere of spellbound and tragic meditation in which all action is arrested, an atmosphere oddly linked to the spacious and verdant landscape. There is a measured realism in the style that shows how much of the spirit of Jan van Eyck continued into the last decades of the 15th century, perhaps transmitted by Hugo van der Goes. I don't know. But beyond realism, there is an awareness of nature that embraces both the heavy richness of summer foliage and the equally oppressive weight of melancholic brooding. Hirtgen's influence not only contributed to the eccentric art of Bosch, who's definitely one we'll have to look at some point, but also established a sense of the natural environment, both fertile and at the same time deeply serious, that remained basic to Dutch art forever after. Oh, speaking of which, things are about to get weird, guys. Hirtgen's awareness of nature, as well as his reticent, rounded figure drawing, contributed a good deal to the education of the most original of Netherlandish painters, Hieronymus Bosch. But Bosch, far from continuing the Flemish tradition, departed from it in almost every respect. The inventiveness of his fantasy and the freedom with which he used paint are both exceptional in Netherlandish art. His sardonic humor and the ruthlessness of the judgment that he foresaw for mankind are quite unparalleled in the art of his time. His pictures follow a regular form. Humanity is tempted and succumbs to transgressions of the most various kind, which are succeeded in their turn by an infinite variety of fearful punishments. The attractiveness of his pictures rests in the central scenes abounding with metaphors for fleshy indulgence, which called forth on all the fertility of the painter's invention. The Ship of Fools is no exception. A peculiar boat carries a party, including 2 nuns and a monk, who are well advanced in the pursuits of gluttony and lust. I just had to pause and look at this image to make sure that there wasn't anything obviously inappropriate. You never know with Bosch. The vessel, without a pilot or a course, is filled with the most greedy and corrupt of conformist humanity. Its mast is the tree of life. Who dat? However unenviable the condition of those who sail it, there are swimmers willing to take their place. The comparatively prosaic species of sin in this picture were later succeeded in the middle panels of Bosch's great triptychs by the most fantastic imaginings, fantasies that became more and more clearly ends in themselves. Orthodox though Bosch's creed evidently was, posterity has been puzzled by the question of how he managed to secure support and patronage for his unconventional style and licentious imagining. The explanation seems to be that he needed no patronage. He was married to one of the richest heiresses in the Netherlands, enabling him to imagine and paint with a freedom that anticipated the rentier painters of more recent times. There's so much happening here. David. So this might be a good place to stop for this installment of Paintings in the Louvre. This is a gigantic book. Ooh, very heavy. And it'll definitely take a few videos to get through it. But I hope you found this relaxing. As always, let me know if you have any requests. And I hope you have a wonderful evening.